Welcome everyone to Hangfire. On today's episode, we're sitting with author Chris Epting. Chris is the author of over 40 books and a trusted voice behind memoirs from the likes of Def Leppard's Phil Collen, John Oates, and the Doobie Brothers. He's written the great book, Moonlight Miles, a guide to Rolling Stones landmarks across America between 1964 and 1981. A wonderful collection of photos and stories as Chris has traveled the world tracking down some of the most iconic landmarks tied to the Rolling Stones. And we're here today to talk about a few of his great discoveries. Who knows, a Stones landmark might be just in your town. Chris Epting, welcome to Hangfire.
Justin, thanks for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here, and kudos to you for all of your great historic work.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so happy you're here. I can't wait to get into this because this is like a Stones fan's dream to talk about these kind of things. To kick things off, you're kind of like this, like the Indiana Jones of the of the Rolling Stones world, because you're like out there finding these historic landmarks and investigating these huge moments. What was the first Stones landmark you discovered?
Well, for me, it goes back to just a little bit before the Stones. As a kid growing up in New York, there was an article once, I think it was in the Daily News. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and it was about Marilyn Monroe, and it showed the famous shot of her in the 7-year itch where her dress billows up on the subway grate. And it told the story of the fact that there was a very real subway grate where they shot that at the northwest corner of 52nd and Lexington Avenue. And right then I thought, well, this is cool. There are cultural places that you can go to. That's what planted the seed. Then as a kid, I started as a Stones fan really early, about 4 or 5 years old, hearing Get Off My Cloud on the radio, which to me just sounded it's the first song I remember hearing as a kid, and it just sounded so joyous and upbeat. And then after that, Honky Tonk Woman, I was about 8 years old, and there was just a sound. And so, long story short, by 1971, 10 or 11 years old, I'm in. I mean, I'm like really developing this kind of crazy passion for the Stones.
Absolutely.
And the first landmark, I think, was in 1974. We took our first trip to California, my family. My dad had a business meeting, and we turned it into a vacation. And we were staying at a hotel called the Century Plaza Hotel, still there, nice hotel. And there was a movie theater attached sort of to it. And they were playing, ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones, which to me was like, I'd read a little bit about it, I think in Rolling Stone. It had just come out. And it was right there. So my twin sister and I, the first night we got to California, we went to see the movie. And when you went in, they gave you a copy of the It's Only Rock and Roll single, like just for going in, which I thought was cool. And it was empty. I think there were maybe 4 or 6 people in the whole place. But I bought this. They had a little shop that they had set up in the theater. And I bought this kind of a 72 tour book, which struck me because it says Mick Jagger and his tour, not even the Stones.
Nice.
But it's a wonderful book. It's got great pictures I had never seen. And so, to be 11 years old or whatever and be surrounded by that movie was like an epiphany. And the next day, in terms of landmark, my mom was shopping for a leather handbag, and there was a nice shop in Beverly Hills, and we all went there. And I had also purchased at the movie theater a pendant that hung around my neck, a Tum logo. Proudly, I'm wearing it.
Sure.
And we go into the leather shop, and one of the employees, he sees it, and he goes, "Hey, are you a Stones fan?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah, I love them." He goes, "Well, you should have been here yesterday, because yesterday Bill Wyman came in. He needed a black leather jacket for a TV show that he told us he was going to be appearing on." Looking back on it and lining the timing up, he was probably doing press for Monkey Grip Glue for his solo album at that time. And it struck me because I thought, and he showed us, he said, Bill Wyman signed this receipt for us, and
Nice.
It was really cool. And for the first time, it hit me like they were people, you know what I mean? Like they were
Right.
a human being. In a pre-MTV world, it's
Sure.
like, these were monolithic, godlike figures.
Yeah.
And so for years, that was I would always, when I moved to California in the 1980s, whenever I would pass that leather store, I would think, that's where Bill Wyman had been. That was the first one. The second one was about a year later. I'm in 8th grade. It's May 1st. The school is winding up. And pretty soon, and I'm walking through the hallway, and one of my teachers, his name was Mr. Berkowitz, Pierre Van Cortlandt Middle School, Croton-on-Hudson. He was sort of the hippie teacher. He had long hair, and he was cool. He would like lend albums. Hey, have you heard the new Yes album? Like, he was
Cool.
that guy.
What a guy.
And he knew, everyone at that point knew what the Stones like were to me, and he saw me, he goes, hey, he called me by my full name, the one teacher. He said, Christian. I said, yeah. He goes, well, you're going to be really excited today. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, the Rolling Stones played a live concert on the streets of New York today. And I said, what? He goes, I was in the teacher's lounge and we had the TV on, and yeah, they pulled up on a truck and they announced a tour. And again, in the mid-'70s, today, of course, we know a tour is coming. Back then, these were surprises.
Sure.
You might have read a little blip about something coming, but when news like that was unleashed, it was news. You didn't really see it coming. And so I went home that day. My head was like exploding all day thinking about this. And I put the news on, and there they were. It was a major news story the day they announced the 1975, what was then called Tour of the Americas. And, that it was every May 1st, I think about that day to this day. And my father got tickets that day for us. He had a connection through the ad agency where he worked. And the first show, it was going to be the first night at Madison Square Garden, June 22nd, 1975. And what was amazing was that after that show, like I found in the last couple of years, there's footage of that show. There's not a lot of footage from 1975. They shot the show at the Forum, obviously. But beyond that, it's pretty scant. But there is footage, not only of that show, but the same basic perspective I had. Like, the camera guy had to be right near us. We had really good seats. So I got the benefit of like my very first Stones show with footage of the first two songs, which was crazy. And so on the TV, I recognized the building on Fifth Avenue and 9th Street, where I knew that building. And I knew, so again, in terms of landmark, that's where the truck pulled up. That was like a really big deal. And the third one, which was way more intense, was I was now in high school in 1977, John F. Kennedy High School, Somers, New York. It's a private Catholic high school. And one day, a girl I knew, she pulls me aside like she's got a secret. And she goes, look, you can tell like your little circle. Again, she knows I'm a Stones person. Now it's sort of like, it's part of my persona.
Everyone knows to go to you for anything Stones related.
Anything.
Yeah.
And she pulls me aside and she says, look, she goes, my mother is a realtor in the area and she just sold a house to Keith Richards. And you need to know this. And I said, really? She goes, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you an address. But again, keep it amongst your circle, And we were in different circles. She was a super pretty cheerleader. I had like my little music nerd friends. But she was cool enough to know that this would matter to me. So she gives me an address. I go home. I get out a map because back then you'd get a map. And found where the house was in South Salem, which was about 15 or 20 minutes from the school. This is in Westchester County, which is very rural. And there were people who did live up there who were well-known, but kind of lived off the radar a bit. A couple of friends and I go, and we find the house. And it's in South Salem in a little area called Frog Hollow. And it's not, you can see it. It's right on the road. It's a pretty house, but it's not like a crazy estate like you would have in a lot of those parts up there. And a friend of mine with me that day, he goes, he doesn't live. There's no way Keith Richards lives in this house. I said, yeah, but she said, he probably bought it like as an investment or for a family member or something like that. But this is not his house. And we're standing there. There's a tire swing in the front yard, it's very distinctive, and the house. And I want to believe this, right?
Sure.
And a couple of weeks later, when Love You Live came out, Mick and Keith were on the cover of People magazine. I get the magazine, open it, and there's Keith on the tire swing with Marlon.
Right, that classic shot. Right.
And that was the proof that this was the house.
Oh my God.
So long story short, this becomes an important landmark because for about 2 years, me and my little group of Stones fans who, again, they weren't like me. There was one guy named Mike who got it. He and I were kindred Stones spirits, and everybody else liked the Stones, but that became, there was a little place you could park in front of the house, kind of nestled in these trees. It was sort of hidden. And we would start going there just to sort of, if I found a new bootleg, I'd make a cassette of it. We'd go play it. And at night there'd be cars coming and going. And we'd always wonder who was in the house, and then you would start getting almost Bigfoot-like reports of Keith was seen at 7-Eleven, and now that's starting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then one night I think it was in 78, juniors in high school, there was a nearby movie theater in Cross River, and they were playing Gimme Shelter and Ladies and Gentlemen back to back, like a midnight movie thing. And we all went, and I had my Stone shirt on, and the weirdest thing happens. We're in line to go in, and I'm like, Professor Emeritus of the Rolling Stones. I'm pontificating about what we're going to see and all this. And as we go in, the guy taking the tickets is like maybe one of the managers. He goes, "Hey, you know a lot about the Rolling Stones." And I said, "Well, I tried." He goes, "Well, you'll be really interested. Look over there. Do you see that woman like by the, concession thing?" I said, "Yeah." And there was sort of an older looking, inebriated woman. He goes, "That's Anita Pallenberg." I said,
Whoa.
"Really?" And you look at her, and it was.
Jesus.
And he said, "She came last night, and she's here tonight, and she just sits in the back." Now, what was weird about it is, we got close enough to hear her voice and all that, but she was with somebody who kind of looked familiar. By that time, there was a lot of music happening in New York, and I started going to like CBGB and Max's Kansas City and these places. And I had just seen a band called Television that I loved. Big Television fan, if you're familiar. And I was close enough at CBGB where they were like looking at you right now. And the guy she was with looked like Richard Lloyd. I remember thinking, God, that looks like the guitar player on Television. Years later, as a music journalist, I'm interviewing Richard Lloyd, and he's talking about how he and Anita Pallenberg had become basically drug buddies. They would score heroin together and all this. And I said, it's funny. He goes, and I would go up to Westchester to their house. And I said, "Did you ever go to a movie with her?" He goes, "I think we went to see Gimme Shelter." I said, "I think I was there. I think I saw you with her." So again, all these kind of weird things around that house. But
Amazing.
The thing that really got us was we would think of excuses to go knock on the door. Right?
I bet.
And, my younger sister was selling Girl Scout cookies, right?
Perfect.
And so we go there, knock, and a black woman answers the door, really nice. I think she was the nanny I read about later. And she opens the door. Now, there's Marlon Richards and his sister and guitars all over the room. So any doubt, we would always be looking for that would always solidify.
Yeah, it's locked in.
And we would sell the cookies and bring them back. And we always would sort of peek around waiting for that glimpse that never happened. This goes on for 2 years. It becomes
Wow.
our go-to spot just to kind of go and sit and talk about life and wait for what might happen at that house. And then something in July of 1979, now we're seniors in high school. We're getting ready to go to college. And, it's the end of the 70s. It's kind of a weird time, and we're all going to be leaving each other. And we go up to the house like one last time. It's the dead of summer. And that day, our ruse was going to be that our car overheated. So knocking on the door, there's no answer this time. And it doesn't seem like anybody's home. And around the corner comes this guy, young. I remember thinking he was like in his mid-20s. He carried himself older than us. And he's wearing like a sheep herder's frock. And he's got a staff like
Okay.
Moses.
Uh-huh.
And he comes around and he's really nice. He says, "Hey guys, what's up?" And we're like, "Oh, car overheated." He's like, "No worries." He disappears and comes back with a jug of water. And we're like, the car doesn't need water. And he goes, I'll even put it in for you. Like the guy, he can't be any more accommodating. And we drop all the pretext and say, "Look, is Keith home?" It's like, this is it, And his whole demeanor changes. And he says, because he's not home. He's out of the country right now. He goes, "But I have to tell you," because if he were home right now, he wouldn't be cool with this. He doesn't like people kind of coming up, and he's super private. So you guys can't do this anymore. And it was like for us, this rite of passage. Here was this house, this real landmark to us that we realized now we had to let go of, And so we said, we were very apologetic and left. And about a week later, we pick up the local paper, and here's the story of this 17-year-old named Scott Cantrell who had committed suicide in that house. And that was the guy that had brought the water to us. So it was like none of us, I remember all of us getting together saying that we didn't ever know anybody who had died at that point, you know? And for me as a Stones fan, it was, I didn't listen to them for a few months. It sounds weird, but all of a sudden it was like, there was this darkness. It was when you read the story about it, it was so tragic and confusing and all this that, I always kind of associated, you know, all of a sudden now the Stones had like a body count, you know what I mean? To me in my world, in this crazy landmark. So those were like some of the first spaces that got to me. And then as I started writing books older, I would write books about cultural places, and I would always start working out areas to let Stones spots be part of that, just selfishly as a fan.
Amazing. My God. You know, and the further you get into the Stones' history, you realize that the body counts are plentiful, you know, everywhere you look, left and right, whether you're connected to them or not. And, you know, that must have been quite something to hang over you. It took a while to shake off once.
We all would talk about it for years, you know, and it almost became like a rite of passage.
Sure.
And it was weird because the Stones at that point, some girls had come out, they were back in a way that was really important, you know, because people forget musically at that time. When I was going down to New York to places like CBGB's, they won't say the Stones were a laughing stock, but they were not thought of in the same way. After after Black and Blue, which I love, but was not an album a lot of people warmed to right away. Love You Live, kind of okay, but at that point in music, these bands had become sort of bloated. Bands like Zeppelin and, you know, other, you know, big arena acts. And it's like, how would the Stones counter that? Well, they countered it in probably the best way anybody could ever imagine with Some Girls, you know? And so they were back on top of the world, yet we had this dark episode at the house, which for a teenager was a lot to process.
Absolutely. Well, let's go back into the city again, because I was very tickled to see in the book that you were able to spot the location for that infamous picture for the "Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby?" Staying in the Shadows photo. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that to me is huge in terms of not just Stones history, but music history. A little backstory is Jerry Schatzberg was sort of the it photographer in 1966. He had just shot the Blonde on Blonde cover for Dylan. And so I believe Andrew Goldham seeks him out and said, "We want you to do something with the band," which he was really excited about. I interviewed Jerry about this years ago for an article I was writing, and he said, so they come to New York and they conjure up this idea of being in drag, but they first go out to shoot them straight, you know, which is a photo I think on the other side of the sleeve. He goes, and they're only a block away. Jerry's studio was on 25th and Park Avenue, and where the picture shot is 24th and Park Ave, right on 24th. And he said that when they walked the band over, there was a little bit of commotion. People knew the Rolling Stones, they were going to be at Ed Sullivan on a couple of nights playing the same song. And there was a bit of a commotion, so they took the picture and got in quickly, and then got into makeup. And he said that Mick said to him, "You should maybe get some security for when we go over again." And Jerry goes, no one's going to know who you are. And B, no one's going to care, even if they know you're a bunch of men dressed as women. This is New York City. New Yorkers will not care about this. He said Charlie hated the makeup the most and Mick loved it the best. He said, and they go out and they on heels and pushing Bill Wyman the way, push him over in the wheelchair. He says they go take the photo, and it's interesting. There's a guy named Peter Whitehead, a filmmaker, who's filming the proceedings. And what comes out of that, why I think it's so important in music terms, is that it's one of the first conceptual music videos that results from that footage for that song.
Yeah.
And you know, this is 1966. Whitehead has already shot Charlie Is My Darling earlier that year, I believe, or the year before, late the year before. And so he's kind of in their circle as a guy who's shooting film. So he films what's going on that Jerry is shooting. And the corner today, it's sort of mid-block on 24th, it's exactly the same. You can sit on that spot, line the bricks up, and it's all there. And Jerry's story about it was wonderful. And he told me that a year later, Frank Zappa called him and said, "I love what you did with the Stones. I want to do a parody album cover based on Abby, no, Sergeant Pepper's. I think it was We're Only in It for the Money." And if you look at that album cover, this guy in a wheelchair, and Jerry said that's the same wheelchair that Wyman was in. It was a studio prop that they had used. So the wheelchair appears on both album sleeves.
That's
But
amazing.
that really is a big deal because Whitehead stays with the Stones. The next year he shoots the video or the film for We Love You. And I think it really sets the Stones off on this course of conceptual videos. And if you look back on what they did over the years, I don't think any band was as visually conscious. When you look at promo videos of a Goat Set, it's Only Rock and Roll, Black and Blue, every album from that point on, basically, there's no other band of that era that shot what they shot and documented what they did, whether it's Rock and Roll Circus, whether it's Hyde Park, whether it's the Marquee Club, on and on. We all know the movies that they commissioned to be shot. So they were very conscious of it. And I think part of it started that day on 24th Street in New York City.
That's a great point. I mean, you can tie it even with the fashion and their fashion sense. I mean, when you see Mick Jagger, you see a very visual, stunning, creature, and what he put on his body and what he put on his face, be it makeup or whatever. He was very conscious of all that.
And there's a clip in the video for Have You Seen Your Mother, Baby of Mick walking right outside their studio on Park Avenue. And you see people responding to him. He kisses a baby that's in a stroller, and you see kids doing these double takes. They can't believe, because they're major international stars at that point, obviously, and they can't believe. You see these double takes, and it's really kind of charming. And there's Peter Whitehead. Now, Peter Whitehead, it's fascinating because he remains in 1971 as the Stones are wrapping up the Exile sessions in France. Jagger writes a letter to the BBC, which I think I sent you a copy of. And the letter basically says, I want Peter Whitehead to have access to everything you've got on us because he and I are making a Stones documentary. Now, the documentary never happens, but as late as 1973, there's another letter that Whitehead sends to Jagger with a list of the film he's got of the Stones. So somewhere there are archives that we don't know about. We're going to, if we get to the Beggar's Banquet album cover session, I'll tell you something else about that involves film that was shot of the Stones actually writing the graffiti on the bathroom wall. That was filmed. So I want to believe that someday these films will make themselves known and result in that documentary that we all kind of want to believe is out there waiting to happen.
And so, the investigative part of a lot of this, finding these locations, a lot of them are visual where you can, that looks familiar, so you go to that spot. But then some spots, you would have to do a lot more digging to get the actual address or the location, of such things. Which was the toughest out of all of them, you think, that took the longest to find?
The rocks at Joshua Tree, where the Stones were shot in either late 68 or early 69 with Graham Parsons. And I don't know if you've been in Joshua Tree before, but there are a lot of rocks and a lot of acreage. And I really wanted to find that because to me, those pictures are just, I think Michael Cooper shot those. They're really interesting and really beautiful portraits of the Stones getting away from it all, and escaping. And I had read that there was a dentist chair sort of that was abandoned in these rocks that they would sit on and look at the stars and, drop acid and all that. And I managed to find the chair is still out there, but it's wedged down into these rocks by a place called Cap Rock. And so that was a tough one. It wasn't really about an address as much as it was just exploring and just lining up mountains and Joshua trees and all these natural effects in the middle of nowhere. It's one thing to be in New York City saying, hey, waiting on a friend video. This is great. It's right here. Here's the address. That's great because you could lock it and nothing really has changed. But out at a place like Joshua Tree, when you're alone, all you hear is the wind blowing and there's just this vast expanse. And to think they were there. And then I would then go spend the night in room 8 at the Joshua Tree Inn where Graham Parsons died, where the Stones had also stayed. So out there, to me, those remote places are really interesting because you just, to find them out there back then, to me, it's just, there's something just less expected about places like that.
Sure. Another one that comes to mind is Altamont. Did it surprise you? Did you learn anything from being in that spot?
Out of all the places, to me, there's something about Altamont that, even you mention it, I get goosebumps, because, you think of that year, you had Woodstock, which if you go to that site today, there's a museum, there's a concert series. It's, it's beautifully preserved. It's safe. It's wonderful and all that. And then you got Altamont, which is still this, it's still kind of out there off the beaten path. There are roads that get there, probably a couple more roads today than existed in 69. But if you get on the racetrack, and I wanted to detail the exact spot of the stage. I didn't just want to go and say,
Sure.
what happened here.
Yeah.
With all the books I write and stuff, so I was very particular. I did a book called James Dean Died Here. It had to be where the car came to rest. And I'm very particular about that. So using a bunch of aerial images and really getting into the detail, I think I found the spot. And I have a shot of my son, much younger years, standing there. But it's today, again, it's kind of like Joshua Tree. When you're out there, you don't really hear the traffic. You're just in this open, vast, dead space. It's always sort of burnt dirt hills. It never gets like beautiful and green. And there's something to me that still feels very apocalyptic about it when you imagine. Look, that's arguably the Stones' most famous show, right? If you look at it, how many names can be defined? How many shows, like one word and that's it, that they filmed and all that became the spectacle that it did and the tragedy that it did. Really, in Stone's lore, I think that's kind of the show. And if you listen to it, it's outside of the disturbances and the stops and starts when Meredith Hunter gets killed, it's a good show. They play well, and it's almost as if they felt the moment and they powered through it in a way that I think is really dramatic. So that one for me is always going to be, out of all of them, there's something about when you find the stage portion, because once you're there, when I first saw Gimme Shelter, even as a kid, when they would run it on PBS in New York, certain places jumped out. Visually, I would think, like, what's Muscle Shoals? Can I go to that studio? Where's that hotel they're walking out of? And where's Altamont? When they fly in, you see all those people, have they built anything on it? I always wonder about that. When you go today, it's refreshingly undisturbed. It's just like it was,
It's
and
eerie.
It really is eerie. And what I like to do at sites like that is actually bring some audio to play the event while you're there. I've done that. I've written a lot of books about baseball stadiums that aren't there anymore. And I would occasionally bring like a game on a cassette tape of a game and just hear that, connect with the event there. With Altamont, that's easy to do. There's a decent quality of that show. First time they play, Brown Sugar. And for me, that moment is important in Stone's history, because if you think about where they are at that moment, in that first week of December in 69, in a way, it's a peak moment. They've Let It Bleed has come out 2 weeks before, I think. They've just recorded Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. They've just wrapped up a tour that really creates the foundation for what all arena tours become. And in the midst of all this, they've started recording Sticky Fingers a few days before. At what point, how much more could they have been doing at that point? That really crystallizes how great that band is, and then it's capped off with Altamont. That's sort of what's to have been the cherry on top becomes this, horrific, catastrophic moment that still shows the Stones sort of behaving heroically and getting through it.
God, so many bands, would have ended after something like that, or probably hung it up. But
no, I remember talking to Chris Hillman about it. He played there with the Burrito Brothers that day. And he said, he goes, the Stones don't get enough credit. He goes, it was totally mishandled and misplanned. He goes, but we got out of there. He goes, but the word was they played their asses off in the face of all of that,
Yeah, and you were lucky because a lot of these spots are perfectly intact, like the spot for the Have You Seen Your Mother baby photo shoot and Altamont, for example. But then there are spots like their very first U.S. concert in San Bernardino.
Yeah, the Swing Auditorium. They obviously performed on the Dean Martin show before that, but it wasn't a concert. They had it to San Bernardino. Everybody played the swing over the years, Hendrix and everyone. And it's gone, but I was there with somebody who was at that show who could locate where the stage was. So you're still, to me, I always say, like, we're breathing the same air, So you're still on the spot where they pulled up and did that. And those early years, to me, there's a lot of great photos I remember my son and I were driving up by Fresno, and someone had just posted online these snapshots that I think Bob, the guy, their first road manager, took wonderful photos. It was them at some little motel in Fresno. And I said to Charlie, like, look it up. And he did. And we were right by it. And I went in and had these pictures of them by the pool just on a hot summer day. And it was unchanged, just a little roadside motel. And I like those places a lot because, again, it's little places that get brushed by this bit of history. The Stones just happen to stay there, and you capture them at its sort of an innocence almost before things really get out of control. Those first couple of tours where they're not necessarily going over the way they would a couple of years later.
How much of these adventures are, things that you come across by accident, or, hey, I'm going to be in this part of the country, this would be a good time to go check that out? Or how many of these were purposeful? I'm getting on a plane, I'm going across the ocean to go see this. I mean, how many of those were, scattered around?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, if I'm writing a book, researching it, I'll map out where I need to be, and I will always selfishly drag in anything Stones related, whether it's for
Smart.
the book or not. I remember going to Muscle Shoals and sitting in there and thinking that I was writing an article, I think, about it, and then going to the hotel where there's a plaque today outside the hotel where they stayed. There's a historic marker. I think we have a photo of it where, they come out of, and it's, again, Gimme Shelter was such I think, so powerful for so many of us to kind of put us on the road like that and give us these little glimpses. So that was a big one that I loved. I remember the first time when I learned one of my favorite television shows is the Andy Griffith Show. And going out, learning that it was shot at Franklin Canyon, that introduction where Andy and Opie, walked on the path, and that the Stones were there for the Greatest Hits collection that was photographed, High Tides and Green Grass. And wandering there, because it's a really beautiful location. It's in LA. A lot of people don't even know about it. And there have been other album covers shot there. Simon and Garfunkel did one there. I think Sergio Mendes did. Other TV shows have been shot there. But when you look at some of the outtakes that day, and just imagine the Stones wandering around in the woods there. And it's so beautiful, those pictures. But, I've located some exact locations where they stood. That was a good one. One that fascinated me, and you really can't line anything up, was where they shot the cover for Satanic Majesty's Request, which was in Mount Vernon, New York. And there was a company called VeraView that in the 50s had developed what we call today lenticular technology, where they layer film to kind of give that 3D look. It had been used a lot in campaign materials for politicians. And the Stones, in a very cutting-edge way with that album cover, wanted to use VeraView. But to do so, you had to go to VeraView to shoot because of the cameras they used. And I think Michael Cooper was actually helping, shoot those using their technology. And the building is no longer there. When I first visited, it was there in the early 90s. And the thought of them trekking up from New York City, about half hour or so, where they famously made their own, they would it was like Arts and Crafts Day where they made all this stuff for the album cover. But the fact that they were there, and today it's like a little industrial park, but that album, I mean, again, of all the Stones album covers, it's right up there with Sticky Fingers and Exile, I think, in terms of artistic uniqueness, and the fact that they were up there is so random, that's where they did that album cover. So it's, I like places like that sometimes where there's nothing left, but they were still there.
For a British band, they really went around the U.S. pretty good, didn't they? I mean,
they did. And I mean, there's a place, I think in the book, a dude ranch in Arizona, where after the 66 tour, Keith went to ride horses for a week or so just to kind of get away. And, they took to America very well, I think. And, they were the first tours traveling by car most of the time. So they were right down there on the ground seeing things. And then it gets a little bit later and they get shot, by the Alamo in 1975. And all of a sudden, here they are in front of one of the most vaunted American landmarks. And that becomes an iconic image. The one I had really a lot of fun chasing down was the original album shot for Beggar's Banquet.
Yeah.
And I spoke to the photographer, Barry Feinstein, who's no longer alive, but who shot everybody, Bob Dylan, Traffic, Rolling Stones. And he shot that cover. I talked to him years ago, and he's the one that told me that they had found a gas station that was then located at Vine and Franklin. It's no longer there, but there's a car repair place that part of the building is still there, original building, but the bathroom's no longer there. And he told me that they filmed the graffiti being put on the thing. So again, somewhere there's film of that, and Barry shot all of that in the bathroom. Jagger was there. He wrote some of it. And because that year in 68 is kind of interesting in LA, you get that as a great landmark. Frank Zappa's house is another one. That's where supposedly Mick Jagger first met Mick Taylor, where Zappa has a bunch of them over. Taylor is on the road with John Mayall, who did 2 tours of America that year. Mayall would occasionally stay at that house. So supposedly that's where the 2 Micks first meet, is in that house, which is interesting. So LA at that time, I remember talking to Ray Manzarek from The Doors, and he showed me a diner on Sunset Strip where Jagger had lunch with The Doors before they played at the Hollywood Bowl, where Jagger went to. So, sometimes those first-hand accounts, whether it's Ray Manzarek or Barry Feinstein, those are the ones that really matter. The people who were there, who can give you a sense of what it was really like. As a journalist, I always like that because it's a first-hand, it's once removed from the place, which is really nice.
That'd be a hell of a thing to finally see, huh? The actual footage of them decorating the wall for the Beggar's Banquet. It was a cover we didn't see for decades even.
Yeah, and I wondered if it was Peter Whitehead who shot it, because that would fit the era he was shooting, or whether it was Feinstein. Barry couldn't remember who ran camera. He said it was always, he goes, back then with the Stones, he goes, everything was a little circus. He goes, there was always people, little hangers on. You didn't know what they were there for, but they were there and they were not to be questioned. So, but Barry was there to shoot, and Barry wrote his own name on the I think the back cover image of the bathroom wall.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that was a fun thing, to just be standing where it took place. Because again, oftentimes you're left to just sort of imagine in your own mind what it was like when things took place there.
Yeah, I love the way you organize all these locations in the book. It's kind of divided into different states, what's there. And I would imagine that most of them take place in the East Coast, right? A lot of the most of those spots.
Yeah, it's the big cities. You get places like Chess Studios and all that. I mean, one of the most probably meccas for Stones fans is the Waiting on a Friend video down on St. Mark's Place in New York City, which is a great one. And of course, it has dual rock and roll history in that it was the cover of Physical Graffiti. But to me, that one is kind of special too, because again, up until that point, the Stones, they shoot a lot. I mean, whether it's all the videos for Some Girls, the Some Girls Tour, Emotional Rescue, but Tattoo You comes out the same month that MTV goes on the air. So everything changes then. And then everyone starts doing videos. Right. You have to make videos.
Right.
And for me, that one is sort of the last in an era for the Stones in 81. It gets you great New York City locations. And the fact that it's not that far away, when I look at a map and think of Mother Baby, Fifth Avenue and 75, and then Waiting on a Friend, you can kind of draw a line, and it represents serious Stone, really the crux of the prime Stones history there, those 3 locations. And the bar they go into after, St. Mark's Bar and Grill, that's since changed, but it's still there as a restaurant, so you can go in and kind of get a sense of. But to sit on those stairs, that really, for Stones fans, I think is a great one, because it hasn't changed at all. It's so immortal. He and Keith sitting there like that with those other guys around, and that's a classic one. But yeah, most of them are in major cities for obvious reasons. But then you get things like a Joshua Tree, or I've got little concert sites in Utah. I mean, things did happen on the road, especially back in the early days, that I tried to identify just to make it a little bit more interesting and less expected.
Of all the landmarks, tied to their history, if you could recommend one particular one that you think Stones fans should definitely go flock to see, which one would it be?
Well, there's a couple. Altamont. Well, you should definitely go sit on the stairs. The Waiting on a Friend video. That's an easy one. But if you're ever in the Bay Area, the people that still kind of run the raceway there, they never seem to have much of a problem letting you in to kind of wander a little bit.
Wow.
That to me is always going to be a really special spot. You know, I've got my personal favorites. When about 15 years ago, when the Exile box set came out,
Mhm.
and that version of Rocks Off was released, cut to the Robert Frank footage of the Stones just kind of wandering around. That to me was an epiphany, because I knew when I saw it exactly where they were. They were on Main Street in LA. And I thought, oh my God, this is the Exile on Main Street. Like, this was it.
Right.
And I knew I drove down there like the next day and lined everything up. And they only walked about a half a block. I mean, it wasn't like they were walking all over. It was a very limited spot. But I thought that was incredible. And then when I was working on a book, there were those wonderfully iconic images that I think Jim Marshall took at Sunset Sound when they were working on Exile. I went in there and lined up the Mick and Keith shots today. Those are harder spaces to get into. Altamont, you can usually get into. And any Stones fan, I think you've got to go stand in that space and just let your mind drift back to the first time you saw Gimme Shelter and what you felt when you saw just the height of the stage. Remember,
Yeah.
the stage like 2 feet tall, you know, and what
Unbelievable.
went on there. And I think that would be if I could pick one, that to me is the most dramatic and poignant. And again, because it hasn't changed at all. And I think that makes it extra special.
It makes me realize that no other band could have a book like this where you kind of trace, different spots that a band has, visited across a country like this. Is there something unique about the Stones in particular that seems like it's a perfect blend and intersection of American geography and like mythology?
I think the Stones like to travel. I mean, again, you can do this in places all over the world because the Stones have always been such road dogs, and they've always kind of availed themselves to travel. And I think that's part of it. I mean, you look at the touring schedules early on and it's brutal. I mean, but they did it. And they weren't above. I mean, even in the Robert Frank film, when you hear Jagger talking about the coffee shops down south and how good the food is, it's like they got out and did stuff. You know what I mean? They weren't just the Beatles couldn't do that, but I think the Stones were able to kind of move about a little bit differently, and that allowed them to touch more places. And I think the Stones were also so in love with American musical culture that they're in the RCA studios, they're at Sunset Sound, they're at, all these different studios throughout the country that are also really important. And they embrace that. And I think that's a big part of it. I think there's a book on Beatle locations in Europe, which is great. The Beatles did a lot there. And but the Stones in America to me is really special. I remember 1972 going to see a Knicks game at Madison Square Garden. And there was a photographer, George Kalinsky. He was the MSG photographer back then. And on the Knicks program were pictures of the Stones on Jagger's birthday. And I remember thinking, like, God, like this was right here. This was right in this space. That's where I really started getting that idea that wherever they had been was intriguing to me. And I remember being backstage at the Garden a number of times with friends who were playing there and going and thinking, is this where Hendrix sat? Is this where Mick showed I Can Tina Turner Brown Sugar? There are all these little places that they touched that also, if you can go to Muscle Shoals, it's another one I would highly recommend, that you can go take a tour there, and to be in the space where they knock off, you got to move, Wild Horses and Brown Sugar in the course of a day and a half. At the end of that tour, I mean, again, I can't stress it enough. They've just recorded Yah-Yahs, Let It Bleed's out for a week, and they're already working on the new album. I mean, again, in terms of creativity, it doesn't get a lot better for me in terms of Stone's timelines.
Man, that's incredible. I mean, I think when people watch this, they're going to feel motivated to get in their car and get your book and start going. What advice do you have for people who want to go on these Stones road trips? Any pros or cons or anything that they should look out for?
No, be open to anything. I mean, go off the beaten path. Sometimes it involves that. But you know what? If you're going to be in San Francisco, Altamont may be an hour away. It's worth it. You may think, I don't want to battle to get it's worth it. Once you get there, everything clicks in. And if you go stop at the hotel, I think whenever you can connect places thematically, that's kind of fun as well. That's like going to Joshua Tree and then going to stay at the Joshua Tree Inn in San Francisco. You can go to the hallway where they first arrive, and Keith says, "It's my local groupie inn," and you see them playing Brown Sugar with the late great Stanley Booth in the room. You can go to that hotel, before going to Altamont, kind of retrace that day. But I would just say be open to connecting dots and spending a little bit of time, and bring the music with you. Be able to listen to things, play Waiting on a Friend at the site on the staircase. You got an iPhone or whatever today. There's no reason to not soundtrack wherever you happen to be visiting. People would watch, even if you're not a huge Stones fan, at a certain point, it stops being about the Rolling Stones and it's about culture. There's a picture that I have that is from the Hamptons, I think in 1972, of Mick Jagger and Bianca Jagger and Lee Radziwill, who was Jackie Onassis's sister, who was sort of a tag-along on the 72 tour. And it's this great photo. It was taken at, I believe, at Ahmet Ertegun's place in the Hamptons in 1972. The reason I know that is that I was working on a book idea with a guy named Jerry Greenberg, who was the president of Atlantic Records back in the 70s, and who Jagger liked and trusted a lot, to a point where at the end of the 72 tour, Jerry told me that Ahmet pulled him in the office and said, "Look, Mick's getting tired. I'm sending you to Pittsburgh. He's got 2 days off before New York, and I want to get him some. He'll tell you he doesn't need it. I want him to rest for 2 days. The New York shows are big. So you fly down to Pittsburgh. He's expecting you after the show. You grab him, get him on the corporate plane, and take him to the Hamptons. I'll have a car waiting for him." And so Jerry does. Jerry flies down to Pittsburgh. He's not seen the 72 tour yet. He says, for one, he goes, this show is there's footage of that show online, little home movie footage. Jerry goes backstage after, he goes, and Jagger is waiting for him he's got a bag packed. He says, Jagger is so together. He's expecting Jerry. But what got me about this kind of story, he says, Mick's wearing, that night it's the purple jumpsuit, because he's still in the jumpsuit. He's not getting changed. He leaves the gig fully in the war gear, right? They get in a car, they go to the plane. Mick falls asleep on the plane almost instantly. It's maybe an hour or so to the Hamptons. He goes, we land in this little private strip. There's nothing around. He goes, Jerry, all you can hear are the crickets and frogs when you get out. And he watches Jagger wander off in the night, still wearing the purple jumpsuit with his bag. He uses a car flashing its lights, indicating that's the driver for him. And he watches him kind of wander off. And I think, if I could go to that landing strip today and think he could, and Jerry goes, here's Jagger. He's the most sought after human being on the planet at that point, just by himself in the middle of the night, so you get these evocative images that, to me, if you retrace them, could be interesting just on a storytelling level. It's not just about the Stones. It's about celebrity. It's about rock and roll. And that picture of him with getting back with Bianca and Radziwill, I think, is taken during that little break before the New York shows. You can see the hair length. There's things you can do sort of detective-like to line up when pictures were taken. It looks very much like that. So pictures, to me, when I see a picture, I always think, that's a great shot, but then I start thinking, where was it and when was it exactly?
Which leads me to, could there be a part 2, a follow-up book with more spots that you need to get to?
Totally. I wouldn't go much beyond the 80s. After MTV, to me, things change a lot. Everything becomes more well-known. To me, it's sort of pre-MTV, but within the mid-60s to the late 70s, early 80s, there are still plenty of things to be discovered. I've learned about a bunch of them since that I could do, and I learned from I'd like to weave in stories I've heard, books I've written with other people, memoirs with musicians. They often will bring untold Stone stories in as well. So I'd like to sort of blend those stories with more untold stories on the road.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was some connections. Members of the Doobie Brothers had also some stories that connected to a lot of this.
When I was writing the book with Pat Simmons and Tom Johnston, who were the two founding members of the Doobies, Pat was telling me that on the Doobies' first real major national tour, they were opening for T-Rex, which alone is kind of a funny, back then they would throw these bills together. I mean, it doesn't seem to fit, but it was what it was. And the Doobies were the opening act. And Pat said that in the winter of 72, they're playing at the Hollywood Palladium, opening for T-Rex. The Stones at that point are working on Exile a couple of blocks away. He goes and Jagger shows up at the show.
Nice.
He was out always hearing a lot of music. And after the Doobies played, during T-Rex, the Doobies are getting, washed off, whatever. And Mick came back and said, you guys are incredible. You guys wanted to come back and tell you myself, I really enjoyed your set. Pat said he was just incredible. So fast forward about 2 years later, the Doobies are on their first tour of Europe, and it's a promotional tour from Warner Brothers. They play the Rainbow, or the Marquee Club, I believe, and Mick's there. And there's a wonderful picture of Pat and Mick talking after the show, which I think you have. And Mick is saying to him, you guys need to open for us sometime. You're too good to not open for the Stones. And Pat's like, how much better does it get? 1978 on the Some Girls tour at the Superdome in New Orleans. Talk about a show, Van Halen, the Doobie Brothers, and the Rolling Stones. And Pat said that Mick was very particular that day, saying, it took us a while, we got it together. At least we got it together, which was amazing. And one other one I thought was cool was, two others quickly, if we have a minute, with John Oates. John told me a story when we were working on his book that in 1974, another great kind of mismatch tour was Hall & Oates opening for Lou Reed.
Whoa. Okay.
And they played the Felt Forum in New York, which was part of Madison Square Garden. It's been morphed into another theater today, I believe. And Jagger came backstage. Again, he would go, watch a lot of bands. Came back, spoke very highly of Hall & Oates. They kind of connected, and they'd see him from time to time. Well, when Live Aid rolls around 1985, Jagger needs a band to back him up, and he goes to Hall & Oates. And John says they have one rehearsal at SIR in New York City. Jagger comes in, all business. They're going to do 5 or 6 songs, and John says, he's never seen anybody prepared. He comes in and he goes, and even in the scope of playing in this little back room at SIR, he performs as if he's in front of 100,000 people. John says, normally you play like an introverted sound, not Jagger. He says, so he, super professional, does that and leaves. After the set at Live Aid, Mick says to John, look, I need all your band numbers, names, and contact. I want to send each guy a case of wine. John's like, great. So John arranges that. A couple of weeks later, John says that sort of with Mick, the business thing is always at play. And he says that the band members got like a decent case of wine each, whereas Daryl and John got like Lafitte Rothschild, something really over the top. He goes, Mick clearly made a distinction of who got what. You know what I mean? Which is, I think, brilliant. And the third one,
London School of Economics.
All the way down. And Dave Mason I wrote a book with. And Dave, of course, was in Traffic, where Jimmy Miller was producing the first album. And Dave told me how Mick would always, he says, everyone knew about Jagger at that time. He was always up on what was happening anywhere. And he started popping in to the Traffic sessions and really liked what he was hearing. And said to Jimmy Miller that this acoustic kind of organic, earthy sound, that's what he wanted to explore. And so, of course, eventually Miller goes over. It's a huge moment in Stones history when you think about what Miller brings to all of that. But Dave kind of gets swept up in it as well. And Dave starts going to the Beggars sessions. And Dave is somebody who's like, I mean, they call him the Forrest Gump of rock and roll, because he finds himself in these moments. He's playing guitar and listening to what the man said, by Paul McCartney. He does the sessions, Watchtower with Hendrix. Dave always arrived, including at Beggars. And I think part of Dave's personality, he was very kind of quiet and unassuming, taking it all in. And he was a great player. Everybody knew he was a great player. And he's on Street Fighting Man. And Dave told the story of how he's first playing a bass. They're all sitting in a circle on the floor, and Dave's playing a bass drum on the floor. Charlie's got his now famous practice kit that's in a suitcase and all that. And then Dave adds that shentai, that sort of Indian woodwind sound, very distinctive sound at the end of the song. And Dave says people tell him he played on Factory Girl, but he doesn't remember any of that. But Dave was good friends with Brian Jones and really loved him. But Dave's moment Mick invited him to hear the full playback of Beggars once it was all set and done, ready for master, and wanted his opinion. And Dave said to him after, he said, it's brilliant. As you pointed out in your breakdown recently, really, really wonderful breakdown of the album.
Thank you.
But Dave said to him, my honest take is that this is like the first Rolling Stones album, the first true album where you've synthesized all your influences into something that's your own. Your other records are great, but they're all based on other things. He goes, this one feels like, to me, like a debut record. This is the Rolling Stones that's going to be the next Rolling Stone, which I thought was really prophetic, and he really hit the nail on the head with that. So yeah, again, I love, I'm working with Paul Rogers right now from Bad Company on his story.
Fantastic.
And I showed Paul a picture of he and Jagger from December 1974. And I believe it's at the Robert Stigwood party where Mick Taylor resigns, like that night. And Paul, he's like, he remembers the party. He goes, I would love to have known that. He goes, because you think about, like Paul says, what happened that night, supposedly, where, Mick goes right to Ron Wood, where it all kind of happens. I know some of that is mythology, but there was a party where it supposedly happened. So again, it's like, I love working with other artists because, again, everyone's got some connection. They're all Stones fans. You know what I mean?
Right.
Usually.
Chris, can we tell people where to find more information about you and your books and where they can get in contact?
My website is chrisepting.com. And if you go on amazon.com and pop my name in there, Chris Epting, a lot of books will turn up. I did a whole rock and roll road trip book called Led Zeppelin Crashed Here with a huge Stones chapter, of course. So I've written between Moonlight Miles and all these travel books. I'm really into that idea of tracing down obscure places where, little places where something big happened is how I always like to kind of describe it. And there's a lot of them out there, and I'm always looking. So to anybody watching, do clue us in on things. I'm sure I've missed a lot, and I'm always open to hearing those.
It's a great book, Moonlight Miles. It's available on Amazon. I love reading it, and I think Stones fans will love going through it. And like I said, I think it'll inspire a lot of people to follow in your footsteps. So watch out for a lot more stories coming your way about that, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Justin. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. We'll see you soon. See you next time.